Rylan Zeke had been on the Zalari Education Exchange Program for less than 3 weeks when it happened. The incident, the twitch. The Intergalactic Cultural Integration Campus, or ICC, was a sprawling, dome-covered hybrid of alien and human architecture set on a neutral orbital station. The idea was simple. Mix 20 species in one academic setting. Let them learn from each other, and maybe, just maybe, prevent the next interstellar war. Rylan had signed up mostly because he'd needed to get out of Ohio, and the ICIC scholarship came with full room, board, and hazard pay. He hadn't asked too many questions. He probably should have. "Rylan, your vitals are elevated," said Professor Rondeau, a towering, kelp-colored instructor with 3 eyes and a perpetual look of concern. "I just ran up the stairs," Rylan panted, dropping into his seat in the shared anatomy lab. "Didn't want to miss the dissection. You are aware we have lift tubes." "I like the cardio." Professor Rondeau blinked all 3 eyes in slow succession, then turned back to the holo display. "Today, we will study internal muscular response patterns. Please engage your partner in a comparative scan." Rylan leaned over to his lab partner, a Zalari student named Frix, whose skin shimmered like damp marble and whose fingers ended in soft, translucent pads. Frix had been fascinated by humans since day one, but in the way a child might be fascinated by a blender, curious, but wary it might explode. "Shall I begin the scan?" Frix asked, already holding the sensor wand. "Go for it," Rylan said, rolling up his sleeve. The wand began to hum, passing over his arm. Everything was fine until his left calf spasmed. It was sudden, sharp, and involuntary. Rylan's leg kicked out with a jolt, knocking over a stool and drawing gasps from several students nearby. Frix froze. Rylan clenched his jaw, grabbing his leg. "A cramp. Hang on just a cramp." But Frix was already on the floor, emitting a high-pitched keening sound that echoed across the dome. Professor Rondeau dropped his data pad. "Emergency!" Frix cried. "The human is entering final phase decay. His musculature is betraying him." "What?" Rylan coughed, laughing through the pain. "It's no, I just need potassium." Several students backed away. One spilled a tray of synthetic tissues. "His appendage malfunctioned without provocation," said Bailu, a tall insectoid student with a reedy voice. "That is the stage before system collapse and groviance. We must alert the Mebe." "I'm not dying," Rylan shouted. It was a leg cramp, but the panic had already spread. Professor Rondeau barked orders in Zalari, 2 students triggered the medical lockdown, and a team of 6 med techs burst into the lab with scanners and containment gear. "I'm not dying," Rylan repeated as they hoisted him onto a stretcher. "Put me down. It's a cramp." "Sir," one of the med techs said, "please don't speak. It could accelerate the rupture." "What rupture?" They injected him with a mild paralytic, enough to calm his flailing. The last thing he saw before darkness crept in was Frix, trembling in a corner, whispering. It happened just like the lecture. The twitch of death. When Rylan woke, the lights were low, and the med bay smelled like antiseptics and artificial lavender. His leg still hurt, but the cramp had passed. A soft beeping sound came from the monitoring unit beside him. His arms were strapped down, not tightly, but enough to notice. He shifted. "Please do not move," said a voice. A Zalari nurse stepped into view. Her name tag read Tinley. She held a clipboard and looked mildly afraid. "You suffered an event of violent muscular betrayal," she said. "We are monitoring for further disintegration." "It was a cramp," Rylan said. "A leg cramp. You get them when you overexert." "We are familiar with the term," Tinley replied, "but not with the reality." It appeared terminal. Well, it wasn't. Tinley made a note. "You have been stabilized. However, the academic board has requested a formal review to determine if your species is safe to integrate in anatomical courses." Rylan blinked. "Because I had a leg cramp?" She nodded once. A day passed. Then another. Rylan was confined to the med bay while administrators, instructors, and alien biologists debated his condition. He got visits from a few curious students, but most kept their distance. On day 3, Frix came. "I brought a fruit," he said, holding up a small red sphere. "It contains potassium. I researched it extensively." Rylan took it. "Thanks. I also reviewed over 78 hours of human physiology footage. I now understand that your muscle fibers can seize without fatal consequence." "That's what I've been saying. But it looks so much like the Grovian death spasm." Their bodies convulse once before liquefying. It is taught as a warning sign. I'm not a Grovian. Frick sat down awkwardly on the edge of the recliner. I am. Sorry for triggering the emergency protocol. I acted out of fear. I get it, Rylan said. I mean, if you started vibrating and your eyes rolled back, I'd probably freak out too. Fricks tilted his head. That is the standard Zolari sneeze. Okay, that example. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Fricks said, would you consent to allowing a controlled Cramp demonstration? For academic purposes. You want me to? Cramp again? Voluntarily. So others may understand. I'd rather not. But how else will we learn? Rylan sighed, glancing down at his leg. I'll think about it. 2 days later, he was summoned to the main auditorium. The seating was filled with students from 18 different species. The smell of ozone and citrus lingered in the air. Professor Rondeau stood at the front with a solemn expression. Today we gather for a special demonstration. Student Rylan Zeke has consented to simulate the muscular event previously mistaken for terminal decay. I said maybe, Rylan muttered as he stepped onto the stage. Frick stood beside him, holding the potassium fruit like a ceremonial offering. Rylan cleared his throat. Okay. First off, I'm not dying. Second, yeah, this is gonna look weird. But it's just a cramp. Watch. He stretched his leg, then tensed it deliberately. A small twitch. Then again, sharper. His foot kicked slightly. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. Several students leaned back. One fainted. Still alive, Rylan said. Still very much alive. Professor Rondeau stepped forward. May we scan your musculature during the event? Sure. Knock yourselves out. A dozen scanners activated, bathing him in blue and green light. Data streamed to overhead displays. Fricks narrated. The muscle contracts involuntarily due to ion imbalance and exertion. There is no internal rupture, no system-wide failure. It is temporarily painful but not lethal. He handed Rylan the fruit. Potassium helps. Rylan took a bite. It was sour, but not bad. After the demonstration, dozens of students lined up to ask questions. Some wanted to know how humans survived such spasms. Others asked if they could safely touch a cramping human. One even asked if cramps were contagious. By the end of the day, Rylan had been dubbed the Twitch survivor. Fricks insisted it was a badge of honor. Weeks passed. The story spread. Eventually, the ICC updated its medical database to include human cramp, non-fatal muscular event. But the story didn't end there. 2 months later, Rylan was invited on a planetary expedition course. Students from multiple species would study terrain, survival, and biology on a nearby temperate moon. Rylan, still a bit infamous, was assigned a tent with Fricks and an amphibious student named Yundu. On the second night, disaster struck. A sudden temperature drop froze the camp's water supply. The heating grid failed. Several students began to panic. Rylan, wrapped in 3 layers and shivering, sprang into action. We need to get the heating module jump-started. Fricks grabbed the secondary battery. Yundu, help me with the cables. But the connectors are incompatible with our systems, Yundu said. Then we'll use manual conduction. Metal, heat, friction. Come on. They worked through the night, teeth chattering, hands numb. Rylan's fingers cramped twice. Each time, Fricks flinched. Not death, Rylan muttered. Just frozen blood flow. By dawn, the heating grid flickered back to life. The water thawed. No one had frozen. Rylan collapsed next to the module, exhausted. You bent your biology to the challenge, Fricks said, staring at him like he'd just rewritten physics. We call it improvising. I call it adaptation under duress. Same thing. From then on, the Twitch survivor wasn't just a joke. It became a term of respect, a symbol of how humans, fragile and awkward, could still rise in moments of crisis. Rylan never got another cramp without 6 aliens rushing to his side. He didn't mind. It beat being ignored. And the next time someone twitched, the ICIC didn't panic. They watched. They scanned. And they learned. Just like they were supposed to. A week after the heating grid incident on the moon, the I-6 Joint Biology Commission summoned Rylan to take part in a field study on Varn, an aquatic heavy world used for cross-species endurance testing. He hadn't volunteered. No human had. But apparently, surviving a cold snap with only a wrench and a fruit high in potassium qualified as unique biological application under threat. He arrived in the landing bay wearing a waterproof suit that clung awkwardly to his arms. It smelled faintly of burnt rubber and kelp. Fricks was already there, bouncing slightly on his toes in what Rylan had learned was Zalari anticipation, not anxiety. Behind him, a group of 7 students from various species stood in uneven formation, most of them watching Rylan like he might spontaneously combust again. One of them, a tall, willowy creature with translucent dorsal ridges, turned to Fricks and spoke with a fluttering trill. Fricks translated without looking. Zalari wants to confirm you are not under muscle instability today. Rylan adjusted his suit collar. Tell Zalari I'm properly stretched and well hydrated. Fricks's pads twitched as he relayed the answer. Zalari tilted their head and made no further comment. They boarded the drop craft together, the floor slick beneath their boots. The interior lights flickered in turquoise pulses, mimicking Varn's ambient light. As they descended, Rylan noticed the air pressure increase subtly. He took a slow breath through his nose. Why's everything feel heavier? He asked. Varn's atmosphere is denser than Earth's, Fricks said. Your lungs will compensate, but your equilibrium may alter. Great, Rylan muttered. So if I fall over, don't call the med team. The craft touched down in a shallow bay, its undercarriage hissing as it settled into the mud. Outside, the horizon shimmered with pale green water and low, mushroom-like growths clustered on the banks. The briefing had mentioned high humidity and limited visibility after dusk, but no one had said anything about the ground itself moving slightly. As they disembarked, a small amphibious being with iridescent skin approached them. She handed out filtration masks and gestured for silence. This area is under observation, she whispered, her words bubbling slightly through her gill slits. We will be watched by native fauna. Avoid sudden shifts. Rylan took the mask, slipping it over his mouth. Watched by what? Spinal grazers. They're harmless unless startled. They respond to irregular vibrations. He looked down at his boots, then at the barely stable terrain. So no sneezing, falling, cramping, or stepping wrong. Fricks patted his arm. All things you've been observed doing. Thanks for that. They moved inland toward the research station, a low-lying structure half-submerged in brackish waters. Inside, the temperature dropped considerably. The walls were lined with bio-readout panels and several tanks containing native microfauna. A large table in the center held sealed nutrient packs and hydration tubes. Hydration every 35 minutes, their guide said as she clipped a monitor to Rylan's wrist. You will be scanned for electrolyte displacement and muscle strain. If the readings shift too quickly, your body may be taken offline for safety. Rylan raised an eyebrow. Taken offline? Sedated, she clarified. To prevent cascading failure. He glanced at Fricks. You told them I was fragile, didn't you? I provided contextual background. Your physiology is still being evaluated for pattern irregularities. The next 3 hours passed in humid monotony. They collected samples from the water's edge, tagged several gliding lichen clusters, and fed data into portable consoles. Rylan's suit began chafing at the knees, and his calves buzzed with the early signs of fatigue. He paced himself, drinking from the hydration tube every 20 minutes instead of 35. No one noticed. It wasn't until the 4th hour that the incident occurred. They were mid-transit between 2 observation posts, walking single file along a narrow strip of hardened soil. The spinal grazers were visible now, long, flat creatures that shimmered like oil and flexed their bodies in slow waves under the surface. Rylan stepped wrong. His foot slid on a patch of algae, and his leg jolted forward in a reflexive attempt to regain balance. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't fall. But his quad tightened sharply, and the motion was just exaggerated enough. A deep vibration rolled through the ground. Zalari froze. The grazers stirred, undulating toward the bank. I didn't cramp. Rylan hissed, bracing himself. Your movement was sufficient to trigger a response, Fricks said, already pulling out a signal flasher. Remain still. The grazers breached the surface, their bodies fanning outward like manta rays. They emitted a low, oscillating hum that resonated through Rylan's chest cavity. What happens now? He asked. If they sense aggression, they emit a directional pulse, the guide said. It causes temporary neural confusion, like a stun, like forgetting how your limbs work. One of the grazers swam closer, its eyes, if those were eyes, fixing on Rylan. He stood motionless, breathing through his nose, counting the seconds. Then, behind them, one of the smaller students sneezed. The grazer pulsed. Rylan's legs collapsed. He hit the ground sideways, the impact knocking the wind out of him. His vision doubled. He heard someone shout. Another grazer pulsed. A ripple of chaos spread through the group. But Rylan wasn't hurt, just disoriented. His limbs felt disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. He tried to say something and ended up blinking at the sky instead. It took 10 minutes before the grazers calmed. The group had retreated to the far bank, dragging Rylan with them using a hover sling. He regained full control after another 15 minutes, sitting up with a groan. "Okay," he muttered. "Maybe I am a hazard." Fricks crouched beside him. "You moved with too much suddenness. Your muscle group emitted a pattern inconsistent with the environment." "I slipped." "Slipping can be fatal on Varn. You were fortunate." Back at the station, he was scanned again. The readouts showed minor dehydration and a brief spike in blood glucose. Nothing critical. Still, the lead biologist insisted on an extended observation cycle. Rylan lay on a padded bench, one arm hooked to a slow-release electrolyte drip. The hum of the filtration system filled the silence. "Do you know," Fricks said, sitting nearby, "several of the others now believe your muscle spasms can summon wildlife." Rylan laughed softly. "Let me guess. I'm the Twitch caller now." Fricks's pads twitched. "It is being discussed. I need new pants and a desk job. You need better boots." Fricks paused. "And perhaps traction gel." Hours later, when the team returned to the orbital station, the debrief included a half-page addendum titled Human Muscular Reactions in High-Sensitivity Environments. Rylan didn't read it. The next morning, he awoke to find a small package outside his quarters. Inside was a pair of traction boots with reinforced soles and a note from Zlari. It read, "For the Twitch caller. Please avoid extinction." Rylan shook his head, grinning despite himself. He wore them to class the next day. Rylan sat on the low bench outside the I-6 Xenobiology wing, one boot half unlaced, the other still crusted with Varn mud. The new traction boots had worked. He hadn't fallen once since the grazer incident, but they were stiff around the ankles and squeaked in humid corridors. Across from him, Fricks carefully unfolded a nutrient sheet and offered a corner. It smelled like toasted algae and old pennies. "I'll pass," Rylan said, shifting to peel the sock from his left foot. "This thing's been soaked since yesterday. I think it's growing a colony." Fricks's ocular membranes fluttered in what Rylan had learned was mild disapproval. "You should have reported for dermal sanitation. Prolonged exposure to Varn water invites microbial nesting. I washed it, mostly, with soap. Soap is not." Fricks stopped himself, folded the nutrient sheet again, and tucked it into his satchel. "There are species here that would consider your hygiene practices an act of rebellion. Better than being remembered for falling on a fish and blacking out." Rylan rubbed his shin, which was still tender. "Every time I blink too fast, someone checks a scanner." "They are being cautious," Fricks said. "The rehabilitative committee issued new guidelines after your incident. You are now flagged for unpredictable kinetic deviation. I have a tag? 2, actually. 1 for movement, 1 for non-standard biological escalation. I tripped." "You tripped with consequence." Rylan leaned back against the wall and looked up at the ceiling's soft bioluminescence. "How long until people stop treating me like I'm rigged to explode?" Fricks tilted his head. "When you stop precipitating events that require scientific reclassification. I'd rather be boring again. People used to forget I was in the room." "That was nice." A low chime rang from the corridor sensor. A moment later, a tall being with segmented limbs and a skin tone like damp clay stepped into view. Its neck extended slightly as it looked down at Rylan. "You are the human who summoned the grazers." Rylan winced. "I didn't summon anything. I slipped." "It was effective," the being said. "My name is Vurik. I am compiling data on adaptive threat response. Your species is under review. I'm not a field guide. I'm just me." Vurik's mandibles clicked softly. "I would like to observe your reflex patterns in a controlled setting." "No thanks. Observation only. No physical interference." "I mean it. I'm not a test subject." Fricks interjected before Vurik could press further. "Rylan is recovering from exposure and requires rest. Perhaps another time." "Very well." Vurik's torso bowed a fraction, then retreated down the hall. Rylan exhaled. "Why do they all talk like I'm some kind of alert system? You are the only known member of your species here. Every action you take is extrapolated. I can't even sneeze without someone writing a thesis." "Then don't sneeze." Later that evening, Rylan limped into the I-6 communal hydrotherapy suite. The air was thick with steam and the metallic scent of mineral salts. The pools were separated by species-specific markers, but the central basin was marked open use and mostly avoided due to temperature fluctuations. Rylan liked it because it was half empty and no one tried to scan him while he soaked. He slid into the water slowly, letting the heat seep into sore joints. His thighs still twitched occasionally from the grazer pulse, like a distant phone vibrating in his muscle tissue. He stretched the leg out under the water and winced. From the far side of the pool, someone approached. It was a sleen, a slender aquatic species with long fingers and a mouth that clicked softly when they breathed. Rylan had seen her in the anatomy lectures Kara, he thought, but they'd never spoken directly. "You are the human," she said, her voice rippling like poured syrup. "Seems to be the theme of the week. You experienced spinal pulse destabilization and recovered in under 1 hour." "Yeah, lucky me." She submerged to her shoulders and floated closer. "We consider that type of pulse a full neural reset. Most species require sedation and guided reintegration. I just drank some electrolyte fluid and took a nap." Kara blinked one inner eyelid. "We assumed your systems would cascade. There were bets. I hope you lost." "I did not participate." She paused, then added, "You are difficult to model. Your responses do not follow expected patterns." "Maybe that's the pattern." "No, that is not how patterns function." Rylan chuckled, then groaned as he shifted his leg. Muscles still acting up. Kara moved closer, then held out one hand. "May I examine it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Just don't poke it too hard." Her fingers were cool and light, pressing gently along the muscle. "Your fibers are denser than I expected. More chaotic." "Thanks." Kara tilted her head. It was not a judgment. He watched her work, surprisingly relaxed. No scanners, just fingers and observation. "You know," he said, "back home, we get cramps from all kinds of things. Dehydration, overuse, bad posture. Sometimes just because it's Tuesday. You have stochastic spasms?" "Sometimes. We manage." Kara withdrew her hand. "No structural damage. The twitch will fade." "Good to know." She floated away without further comment. Rylan leaned back and let the water do its work. The next morning, he was cleared for full activity. The medbay released his logs with a note. "Unusual resilience. Subject demonstrates recovery inconsistent with baseline projections." He didn't mention it to anyone. Instead, he returned to class, sat through a lecture on exoskeletal repair, and kept his feet flat on the ground the entire time. No twitches. No disturbances. That afternoon, as he walked through the ethics hall, a group of students parted to let him pass. Not out of fear, just acknowledgement. He caught a murmur from one of them. "Biological outlier." He didn't correct them. At dinner, Frick slid a tray across the table and sat down. "Today, no one asked if you were contagious." Progress. One student requested your hydration regimen. "I drink water." "That's it." They assumed it was more advanced. Rylan stabbed a cube of protein with his fork. "Let them. Maybe next week, I'll rehydrate and levitate." Fricks nodded solemnly. "I will prepare documentation." They ate in silence for a while. The dining hall buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking utensils. Rylan looked up. "You think they'll ever just see me as a student?" "You are a student. You're also an anomaly." "That's comforting." Fricks considered that. Anomalies are not negative. They provoke adaptation. Sounds like a nice way of saying I make people nervous. "You make them reconsider what's possible." Rylan snorted. "All because of a cramp and a fish slap." Fricks didn't laugh. "Because you keep functioning when they expect you to fail." Rylan fell quiet. He hadn't thought of it that way. Later that week, the ICAC issued an updated species interaction guide. Human physiology now included a subsection titled Involuntary Muscle Events, Harmless, Occasionally Useful. It was short, just 3 lines. Rylan printed it out and taped it to his locker. By the end of the month, no one flinched when he stretched. No one scanned him for twitching. And when he tripped on the edge of the aquaponics lab and caught himself with one hand, a few students actually applauded. He took a bow, then walked it off like it never happened.